Hi everyone, welcome to the next edition of our podcast on MVNOs. My name is Mike Mills and I'd like to welcome James Gray. James, do you want to just introduce yourself, where you're from, and then maybe for those that haven't listened to previous ones, give us a little bit of an overview of some of the general terms and what they mean in the industry?
So good morning everybody, my name's James Gray. I'm the Managing Director of Graystone Strategy. Graystone Strategy is a consultancy largely focused on the telecoms segment and very specifically focused on the MVNO segment. And I guess what qualifies us to do that, so I spent 30 plus years in the telecoms industry, and since 2006 I've been launching MVNOs with mobile network operators, startups, MVNOs globally. So let's kind of cover off some of the acronyms. Telecoms is fraught with many 4-letter and 3-letter acronyms. MVNO is a mobile virtual network operator. There's a lot of definitions, but at Graystone we define that as an organisation that targets their customers with a telecoms offer using somebody else's infrastructure. So effectively an MVNO does not have their own masts. They use the masts from, in the UK context, Vodafone or O2 or BT.
What about an MVNA, then an MVNE? And then I think we've done all the MVXs as far as I'm aware.
I think we're getting close, yeah. So a good point, and I think one of the challenges in this industry is those two other terms aren't particularly well defined. So when we're working with our clients, we try and put a definition in place up front. So an MVNE is a mobile virtual network enabler. Normally that is software led. So these are the guys that are providing your billing system. They might be providing a whole bunch of APIs that allow you to stitch into your website to get things set up to do provisioning. But what you will be paying them for is those software services, those software licenses. An MVNA, mobile virtual network aggregator, is exactly that. They already have a mobile network deal, so they're plugged into one of the network operators, and they make their money from reselling that deal. So if you're working with an MVNA, they're charging you for traffic. They charge you for minutes, text, data, and so on. Now, the way it becomes a bit confusing is sometimes an MVNA also does enablement, and sometimes an enabler also has links into commercial deals in some countries and does aggregation. But to keep it clean, if you're paying the entity for your traffic, they're probably an MVNA. And if you're paying the entity for providing you services and APIs, they're probably an MVNE.
And for those people listening, Gamma is an MVNA, so we're a mobile virtual network aggregator, and we do that on the Vodafone and Three network today. So James, 1 year on, I think, from the sort of last time we spoke, and we spoke at length about the kind of Vodafone 3 acquisition. Love to get your sort of feedback and thoughts on, first of all, I think the very recent announcement that came out this morning, but also in general, how you think that's gone.
Yeah, it's quite interesting this morning when I woke up and had to completely replan what I was going to talk to you about, because for those that haven't followed the news, Vodafone have now done a deal to take sole ownership of Vodafone and Three. So they have spent 4.3 billion, or they've kind of done some share trading with 4.3 billion with CK Hutchinson to allow them to take control over Vodafone and Three. They anticipate that's going to give them about £700 million worth of cost savings over the period. So it's definitely a good deal. I don't think it was particularly unexpected. I think the general view was that was always likely to happen because Vodafone is a group, and then having Vodafone UK as a 50-50, or not quite 50-50 JV seemed a bit odd with the group dynamics. I think the big question is, does it change anything after the Competition and Markets Authority's judgment last year? So just as a quick recap, last year we were talking pre the merger going through, and we talked about what the remedies were the Competition and Markets Authority put in place, because they wanted to make certain that if this merger happened, it was still within the public interest and the consumer interest. They were worried about competition. And there was a number of things that Vodafone 3 signed up to. The first was £11 billion worth of network investment. So in bringing their two networks together, they were going to spend £11 billion over 8 years, and that would deliver a sort of very serious 5G standalone network. And work continues with that, of course. The second thing was some of the special tariffs, specifically the lower cost tariffs, which were beneficial to people in sort of cash constrained circumstances. Those had to continue for 3 years. So they're now Continuing, obviously had a year, 2 years left to run on that. And of course, the big one in the MVNO space was, for the first time in the UK, we had a regulated wholesale offer. So what was called the WRO, the wholesale reference offer. And that meant that anyone who was interested in an MVNO could write to Vodafone and get this structured, templated wholesale deal, which was new and exciting. And I think at the time we thought that would drive a lot of explosion in the MVNO market.
So can we drill into those in a little bit more detail, one by one, if you don't mind? So I guess we talk about the competition factor first. What's your perspective on the impact of this on customer competition? I would say on two levels. There's the consumer level, and then we'll put the MVNO level onto that as well.
I don't think competition has been materially impacted by the merger, although to be fair, the merger is still relatively young as mergers go. You know, we've still got two brands trading, so we still effectively got sort of four big brands in the UK, albeit two of those brands are owned by Vodafone. So in terms of has it achieved the status quo, which is probably what Competition Markets Authority wanted at the moment, yeah, I think it has. I don't think we've all seen our mobile phone bills go up significantly. They will go up, but I don't think they've gone up significantly. So I think probably a tick in the box in that regard. I think when we look at the MVNO space, we have seen a change in that dynamic. My personal experience is there seems to be a lot more interest in the UK. We're seeing more brands come to the UK. There's a big long list of new MVNOs that have either announced an intention. So people like Monzo and Klarna, of course Revolut launched, which is probably one of the big ones. And then there was a lot of other smaller MVNOs that are coming to market, people like Zim, Tech Money, Rocket, and so on. Just to spin back quickly to the news today, will that have an impact on the overall CMA judgment and the market in general? My gut feel, based on what I've seen this morning, is probably not, because actually all that's happened is the structure has changed of the trading brand. So I don't think it will cause the CMA to have another look. What Vodafone 3 do have to do 1 year in now is submit an independent report to say what's changed, how things are going with the wholesale reference offer. So that is definitely one thing that's on their work list at the moment.
Great. So we'll come back to the MVNO kind of what's going on point in a bit, but I just want to cover the sort of network piece. I mean, personally, I would say I've definitely observed improved coverage on a kind of local level to where I am. Have you what's your perspective on kind of how the network sharing's going, and have you got a view on the investment side of it? So
there were some very specific controls that were in place. So 11 billion had to be spent, and there was like an 8-year rollout plan. And if Vodafone 3 don't hit specific targets within that, then some of the remedy offers can continue. Again, speaking as a consumer on the Vodafone network, as it happens, I've seen improvements. There's no doubt about that. They are definitely using the modern technology to allow them to roam between the two sites and drive coverage benefits for consumers. So overall, I think probably consumers are as happy or potentially a little bit more happy with their coverage experience if they're a Vodafone or 3 customer.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think as well, having kind of met some of the team at Vodafone 3, I think they're kind of definitely getting their organisation in shape and future ready would be the term I'd use. So I think it's definitely interesting, I think, and they're kind of very clearly doing what they said they'd do, I think, which is not a great surprise, but still, I think you've got to do what you say you're going to do.
I'd agree. And, we shouldn't underestimate the scale of what it is they've got to do, right? This is pretty massive because it's not only about technology integration at network level, it's about technology integration at OSS and BSS level. It's about integrating two rather different brands. A significant amount of work, but what I see is that work is ongoing and they're moving forward as they planned. And let's not forget the people bit. I think what kind of I was most encouraged by, certainly when we met the team there, is the sort of they've kept the MVNO side quite focused. Yeah,
and I think that's positive for the market because it's people that understand it, and as I say, I think they're doing the right things that they need to do. We talked a little bit about kind of what's going on in the market. I would say from a Gamma side, we're absolutely seeing that kind of mass increase. So I think the reference offer drove interest, but the market's unbelievably dynamic right now. I mean, I think it's probably the most dynamic I've seen it in the last 10 years in terms of in the UK market, in terms of new entrants. And I think the really interesting thing for me is the kind of variance in the new entrants. There's financial services led. We continue to see a big drive in the altnet space. Probably we've got 5 or 6 active brands imminently coming to market in that area as they really look to build out their ARPU and their value propositions outside of just straight fixed connectivity. And then I think you've kind of got some really interesting age demographics. We're certainly seeing interest kind of at the younger end of the spectrum and the more price conscious buyer end of the spectrum and you know, even further on in some scenarios. What's sort of your take, James, on the things that are driving that? And then I think what you're seeing across that whole marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, my overall sentiment is the same as yours. I think it's extremely vibrant and busy at the moment. Thank goodness for that. And, you know, all the market reports are sort of supporting that out. So the global MVNO market is meant to grow to about 155 billion by 2031. The European market is meant to be 65 billion. This is dollars, by the way, by the same time period. So we're seeing this forecast growth, and that, you know, that seems to be the actuality as well. So operationally, we're seeing it as well. And, you know, I'd agree that there's a bunch of different sort of growth segments. So definitely the outlet space seems to be very, very interested at the moment. And why wouldn't they be? Because it's a great opportunity to leverage an existing customer relationship for more ARPU. And typically that's what MVNOs have done. Whether or not you're a retailer or a utility or an outlet, you're going to be doing that. Retail is one that's very, very interesting.
It's back in vogue again, almost. Isn't it?
It's really interesting, isn't it? So, you know, I'm a great exponent of the retail MVNO. We've seen, obviously, the most successful MVNO in the UK is Tesco Mobile, 5 million customers. But the recent announcements from Lidl was really interesting. So they were talking about potentially 30 different territories. And what we've seen in this evolution of retail MVNOs is getting it much more embedded into the loyalty side. So making it relevant both from a telecoms perspective, but also relevant to the core business. And I think that's where we'll see the real jumps in interest, because almost every big grocer has got a loyalty scheme now, and they are all fighting it out to try and grow share, or at least not decline share in a very, very competitive market.
Yeah, and I think the one I'm kind of quite interested in, and I wouldn't mind just a quick synopsis on from you, is the sort of fintech one. I think everybody instantly assumes that that's a great marriage. I don't know what the stats are driving though. I've not seen under the kind of hood of what the attach rate looks like. I think personally I've used Revolut from a travel sim perspective. How that would play out as a kind of domestic product though, I'm not sure. What's your view?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've certainly seen a huge trend, not just in the UK, but, you know, across Africa and Brazil and all over the world. We've seen these financially based MVNOs. So again, what we're leveraging is a digital access to the customer, and we're also leveraging the fact that the brand is trusted. If you trust them with the money, you'll trust them with your telecoms. I
would probably argue though, if I'm kind of looking at it from a more advanced economy side, there are lots of buying exists in those markets on phones, right? Yeah. Lots of Africa people purchase using and have done for the last 15 years. Yeah. You know, their telephone is how they buy things. Yeah. How that will play out in Europe, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what the big enabler has definitely been eSIM. Yeah. So the fact that you can now stitch this into your digital journey and probably with 1, maybe 2 clicks, then be able to add a mobile service. And you mentioned the travel sim, and that is the low-hanging fruit, right? The ability to offer some sort of travel benefit within your financial services is brilliant. But Revolut were very successful with that, and then stepped it on and gone, okay, now we're going to do it locally as well. And I think I've not seen any numbers. I think it'll be really interesting when numbers come out to see how that's progressed. But certainly their competitors are very interested. Monzo have announced that they're going to do something in the UK. Klarna have announced they have plans in the UK. So there's definitely a trend. I don't think we know if it's a successful trend yet, but it's definitely a trend.
So look, I think we've talked about kind of things happening right now. We've talked about the last 12 months. We talked about the merger. get out your crystal ball and just give me your kind of view on what you think is likely to happen in the next 12 months. And then I think if we can just then touch on what are the things that are going to make those things a success, that would be a nice way to sort of round off the questions today.
Sure. So predicting is difficult, right? I'm an eternal optimist, so my predictions tend to be probably a bit more generous than maybe the reality. But let's what I think we're going to see is more bigger brands coming to the MVNO space, and there's a few things driving that. I think firstly, availability. So it's a lot easier to get an MVNO deal now. We've got plenty of MVNAs, got plenty of MVNEs. You don't necessarily have to plug into a big, more structured mobile network operator. You can come off the back of someone else's opportunity there. I think the second thing is there's just this socio-demographic thing, which is we now have generations of people who don't recall the fact that there used to be 3 or maybe 4 mobile phone networks. And no one goes out to buy an MVNO, of course. They go out and buy a proposition that suits their needs. And there are plenty of new and exciting MVNOs that they can tap into that align with their lifestyle choices, their shopping choices, or their banking choices, or where they buy their broadband from, or who their favourite influencer is. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting developments. Obviously, things like eSIM help, particularly on those digital journeys, as we talked about earlier. And I think the fact that now consumers are holding onto their devices much longer, so that we've kind of broken this cycle of every 24 months, I recommit to my mobile network. We're seeing that also being a great enabler. So if I was to make a prediction, what would I say? I would be very surprised if we didn't see at least one of the big grocers come to market. That's an easy one, because Lidl have already said they're going to. But I sort of feel like maybe another one might come in, because I think there's now a strategic imperative, right? Lidl have done very well at building market share to the detriment of the other grocers. And plenty of the other grocers haven't yet tapped into that relationship they can have with the customer through telecoms. So I think that's one. I agree with you. I think we're going to see the outnets driving hard as well. I'd have an outside bet, in each way, 20-1 on one of the big financial institutions. And I mean the traditional ones, the Barclays, the HSBCs, the Santanders, starting to see what they could do in this area as well. Again, to protect themselves from the upstarts at Monzo and Revolut, who are again taking lumps out of their market.
Yeah, I think I try to not agree with people on these podcasts just to be a bit challenging sometimes, but I think I agree with that. I think that the signs are there for large brands, and I think one of the things we've been very focused on at Gamma is building a capability that means that we can support some of those bigger brands, because to us the kind of governance, the structure, the rigor that comes with having to service those types of clients is not deliverable by lots of the MVNEs out there, because many of them are much smaller. So certainly from us, I think we see that as a good fit for the way we're building what we're trying to do in our MVNE proposition.
Yeah, I 100% agree, because when you're into the big brands, they've got to protect those brands. So whereas if you're a startup, you can take some risks, it's only your small brand you're impacting. If you are a big bank, for example, you're going to think very, very hard about who you partner with and how you ensure you don't upset all your banking customers with your mobile adventure.
Great. Well, James, I think we're pretty much out of time now, but as always, that was a great kind of snapshot on the industry. And look, if you want to know more, guys, then join in the next podcast series where James and Adrian will be hosting, talking about what successful MVNOs look like.